right, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Hope you had a good lunch here so far. And there's always, it's one thing, food is important at these conferences, so we're gonna try to make sure we have you all well fed throughout the days here for the rest of the conference. But as we get started here this afternoon, I want to introduce to you Stephanie Golden, who is an architectural designer who studied the impact of labor heritage on northeastern Pennsylvania, where she has some roots, as we've discussed in the past, on landscapes of northeastern Pennsylvania and the opportunities in the built environment for what we call adaptive reuse of old buildings, old mining buildings, or just infrastructure in our communities. And she's doing some historic preservation work when she was at Marywood University. So her topics that are guided here are from her graduate level thesis from the fall of 2022 through spring of 2024. And while she grew up down in Lancaster, PA, she has her family's roots, and the labor areas she's going to be talking about are from the eastern middle coal fields. Is it outside Hazleton?
Yep, right around Hazleton.
Right around Hazleton, from about 30 years ago. So Stephanie and I had an opportunity to work earlier this year, and she gave me a run through of her thesis while it was being exhibited up at Marywood University, and we've got a partnership with the university up there, and she's become a volunteer with that camera as well. So I thought this is a perfect presentation to bring to our conference. So I'd like to welcome her and have you all hear her presentation and her thesis work. So.
Before you start, is Marywood and where's Marywood?
Scranton.
That's
Up in Scranton, yeah.
Yeah, Marywood's up in Scranton area, just outside the city. All right.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. My name is Stephanie Golden. Again, this is my Master's of Interior Architecture 2-year thesis titled Coal Mining Towns in Northeast Pennsylvania, Reconsidered and Revitalized in the Post-Industrial Era. So the most common question I get right off the bat is, what is interior architecture exactly? And to me, it's best described as designing for people at the most intimate human scale, using memory and narrative as my guides. So I primarily study and practice adaptive reuse, meaning I give old buildings new life that they deserve. So I'll begin where my curiosity sprouted for my 2-year thesis. So just to give a brief overview, there are 2 main projects within the 2 years of study that are intertwined through their need for revitalization and architecture theory research. The McAdoo project is a pretty conventional, more urban adaptive reuse project that reflects my personal heritage, and the Dickson City project combines both commercial and residential interventions on the same 36-acre site and involves a little bit more environmental research. So the site of any project plays a large role in the first steps of design at any scale. I observed the massive over 50-mile-long scar in the Earth's surface along the northeast Pennsylvania region, and it can be viewed from space. It just constantly reminds us that we have a narrative of extraction and industry here. The widespread issue of abandonment and dormancy in historic towns in northeast PA stemmed primarily from the coal mining heritage that dates back to the late 1800s. As the mining industry dissipated in the area, laborers' homes and communities were left without their original purpose. The main problem to address here is that these places now lack community and engagement, a safe public space, affordable housing, and an identity besides the negligence that they've experienced throughout the last century. In recent years, many of us, including myself, have experienced how housing has become difficult to procure at price ranges that make sense for individuals moving to these kinds of areas, with little appeal in the neighborhood's post-labor era features. So I've conducted a thorough investigation of a few small towns in northeast PA and observed the essential qualities that characterize these existing conditions, as well as key artifacts that will play a role in proposing revitalization strategies. My thesis argues that haptic memory can become the link between artifacts and architectural elements to create an atmosphere that preserves important components of labor identity while reuniting communities through activated public spaces and a reconsidered modular residential design. So maps like these help look further into the literal and figurative layers of the landscape. The map on the left shows the 1-mile-long extent of McAdoo, PA, while the other shows many, many miles of the Scranton area as a whole. So places from my childhood, being McAdoo and Marywood University in Scranton, acted as good starting points within my investigations, even in my undergraduate studies. It is clear to see that historic coal mining villages became the foundation of many urban areas throughout the sprawl of the parallel underground anthracite, along with other natural resources such as the Lackawanna River. It is clear to observe the stagnant nature in many small towns, but the landscape also suffers the same fate, and we don't notice it that way immediately. The scars on the landscape, especially highlighted in these topography maps and other GIS maps, really give us a sense of scale as to how widespread the issue is. So longtime inhabitants of these places may share collective memories relating to their labor heritage. We watch the burdening and dwindling of communities and our difficult economic and environmental situation, while there are also government-funded redevelopment projects over our heads most of the time that claim to erase the history in favor of public warehouses and distribution centers. So here's where my personal connection to my work comes into play. These photos were taken at my great-grandmother's house in McAdoo, the one she lived in since she was widowed by her husband in 1943. The house was owned by the coal mining company, of course, and all she could cling to was raising her 3 children in the house that was paid off by the people who sent my great-grandfather into the mine not to return. So she happily invited all 4 generations to celebrate holidays together at this house for a short time. This house was nostalgic and homey to me in a way that's difficult to describe because I was so young when I was there. So a huge talking point within this investigation is the way of life of coal mining people in the village in the early 20th century and how they held merit in neighborhood unity and making the best of bleak situations. So here's a few images that try to capture to me what my grandparents' house in the close by mining region, how it feels homey and how that may be a universal feeling for other people who still don't have that narrative or heritage that I share. In more academic terms, it's an architectural atmosphere is what I'm going after and using as a guide in my interventions. So when I look at these pictures, I see a strong connection with the earth and the careful act of making things. As charming as having a working coal stove in the home is, it's still a bit of work to look after to adjust the fire, make sure it works seasonally, and keep the coal bin outside stocked. The universal warmth of building birdhouses, for example, is what really resonates with people. The routines of gathering around a table full of food or sitting around a heat source in one space shows the value in human connection and building a community. So in houses like these, bedrooms were often shared, windows were drafty, dishes were old, but it didn't matter because a comfortable atmosphere was created. The unique character of what some refer to as shanty homes in Northeast PA can be traced not only by its physical, actual qualities, but also the lives that were lived on the interior. So this concept applies at the small scale of the domestic interior, but also the urban interiors. Built environments, or towns as we know them, have a passive nature, like an architectural performance that ominously sees everything that happens within it. So these poetics of space are tough parts to narrow down with research because they're so experiential. So stay with me here. We can look at a literal example. A century-old textile warehouse sits in the center of a mile-long stretch of 309 between Hazleton and Tamaqua, about 3 blocks down from my granny's house. So McAdoo is a coal mining village founded by wealthy workers of the Lehigh Coal Company in the late 1800s, as many other towns started. And right now it stands as a quiet, kind of melancholy area with little change since the mining industry dissipated. The building's performance that I enjoyed the most through first-hand interviews were that of a sportswear manufacturer. So this building had a lot of identities, and I like to focus on that one. Men and women worked here until the late 1980s. Women worked upstairs in the quiet, bustling sewing rooms and offices, while the men downstairs took care of the louder, brawnier work, such as hammering snaps into jackets and getting the boxes ready for delivery. The workers had a procession to walk to and from work every day in a place that still sits in a rough-looking alleyway in the back parking lot right now. Though the building served many programmatic purposes, it's now stuck as being this burdensome object that's right in the middle of town with distinct features that really just they can't reclaim its livelihood. It's kind of just frozen in time. So it seems out of place, but the brick shell has survived nearly a century of ownership changes, economic struggle, and physical alterations. What I love about it is that there's potential value in buildings like these, and no one could ever build another building like this due to modern code and its context. The windows are unique, the brick is solid, and the space is mostly open on the interior. The disappointing reality is that the only things that people can cling to in this kind of area are private artifacts at home or a full-scale object like this one. So here's a few drawings of what I proposed for the McAdoo site. I titled it Community Craft in a way to recognize that its rooted purpose in design is to revitalize or recraft the surrounding community. The adaptive reuse interventions are quite conservative, meaning I'm not changing much about the appearance of the building. For example, as shown in the left, when the place gets about as much sunlight as you can in cloudy McAdoo. It is what I want to maintain is the iconographic kind of form to it. So we have these huge 9-foot by 9-foot windows, its rectilinear form with its column details, all the way down to a specific type of bricklaying pattern. So, of course, the majority of materials must be physically replaced or altered, but it speaks volumes to keep details like those. So the biggest challenge with the warehouse can be seen in the right-hand drawings. I propose that the form would be changed a little bit to represent the stature of a coal breaker. The goal is to let the building be an icon through a shape that a community would have recognized decades ago, because little to no breakers exist anymore, and the goal is to encourage exploration and spark intrigue in the visitors' minds. So there's kids around that live here and have never experienced a coal breaker, such as myself. However, there is a limit to how much designers can do this, though. What we want to do in design intervention is to avoid totemism. According to a book called Urban Memory, History, and Amnesia in the Modern City, a totemic project smooths over the site with little regard for what happened in the past. It kind of erases the identity of a place, favoring profit of a larger company that has nothing to do with the place's heritage. The complete contrast from a place's history imposes a disorienting narrative as a whole. So planning for a design intervention within its labor context requires a look at how spaces leave ghosts or traces of memory. Homes subconsciously leave traces of their identity behind through its materials, artifacts, and urban arrangement. So think about moving into a new house that has been lived in thoroughly. You know, if you buy an old stone farmhouse, you're going to see details of those who lived before you. Adaptive reuse must allow for the past to cohabit the space without erasing the narrative that gives it such character. What we're seeing is how the warehouse in the middle of town acts or performs in the urban fabric. According to many, such as my grandmother, it is still an icon in the town, but its current state is overshadowed as a gloomy perspective of McAdoo as a whole. So each of these iterations varies slightly, but the adaptive reuse strategies are consistent. The interior of community craft would include after-school childcare, space for community events such as vendor markets, and an access to an enclosed roof garden, all while passively introducing visitors to local history. Sustainable site strategies are also important to note and implement, such as permeable pavement in the existing reactivated alleyway. I would hope to bring the location back to being a positive central location as a new era for routines around the building, because people used to happily stroll past this place, and even with a new repaved sidewalk along 309, it is very much ignored. So let's circle back to the smaller details again. This is the bridging point between my first and second project within my thesis, the overarching concepts of how haptic memory, or something you touch or interact with, can bring back desired togetherness in small towns. The quick list of observations I made included a couple of handmade artifacts, how consistent front porches are in shanty homes, how versatile central rooms are in the home, and of course there are deep undertones such as religious tradition, gender roles, and financial conditions that molded how everything together works around here. So the mining industry forced these qualities to exist that way over a century ago, but what happens when we have the same sites with entirely new context in 2024? In some small towns, it still looks the same as 1990 and 1910, minus the industry that forced them to kind of look that way. In short, to contribute to a thriving place, it has to be created by people, and the environment has to allow for people to want to do that. So, when broken down into its essential parts, notice the commonalities of shanty house floor plans. These are abstracted from multiple mining cottage catalogs from the early 20th century. The hearth often sits in a large room in the center of the home, of course, for warmth, meals, and conversation every day. So the rooms become characterized by these actions. The community aspect comes through as porches are built onto the front of each house in the row with public washrooms on either end of the street. Reflecting on the fact that oil lanterns were relied upon to light up a room, helmets protected the heads of miners, and brass tags helped clock into work is telling about how much has changed in society's needs and standards since these homes would have been built. And while many houses can actually still look like this, most of the time they're expanded upon, but we still do see houses that are tiny and uncomfortable and don't live up to our standards now. Obviously, not all homes were built and left that way. There were many configurations of mining dwellings based on religion, region, company, and urgency for work. These diagrams originate from the floor plans of Eckley Miners Village, which is kind of the most accurate living mining town museum that we have. These diagrams seek to express the scale of laborers' homes and its relationship to social class. So as many as 12 people could have lived in a single home, and multiple families usually lived in adjacent units shown in the twin configuration. Here's an idea of how much has changed. Construction would have been prefab, of course, with dozens of units along a wide dirt road near a coal mine opening. Many families would work together to purchase a home unit, to later dig out the basements themselves, and they would have a central heating furnace instead of relying upon the kitchen stove, eventually, if they were lucky. Vegetable gardens were common as the main source of food besides the company store. Additionally, leases for single homes were only valid while someone worked in the mine, costing about $1 or $2.50 per room per month. In most cases, indoor plumbing was non-existent, and they required privies as bathrooms, which could have been shared by their neighbors. On the bottom right is a mansion built in 1861. The Sharp House is one of the Eckley's founders, Richard Sharp, making it the largest and most ornate home on its stretch of road. The Sharp family resided on the first 2 floors, while the family servant occupied the attic. The property is located on the extreme western end of town, and the 4 miners' homes would have been a first impression that you would see if you were to visit Eckley. Across the street stood the village's mule barns and fields, creating a stark contrast in social status in the built environment. So it's really intriguing to see how the miners' homes, the owners would keep themselves as detached and differentiated from their workers as they possibly could. One of the common threads that I started to notice in these studies was the importance of the hearth. It can be just absolutely defined as the symbol of one's home. So we can look at some of these homes now. I'd like to now introduce you to the second site of my thesis, an abandoned 36-acre plot in Dickson City with a coal bank on the southern side, and it's estimated to contain approximately 500,000 cubic yards of red ash and home waste. The void is nestled just down the hill from busy Commerce Boulevard in the residential zone right off Main Street, stuck between railroad tracks and the Lackawanna River to the south. After speaking to locals, the biggest issue that arises in this specific area is stormwater runoff and flooding. All the homes surrounding the site were once arranged as mining homes, staying very true to their form from decades ago. What I found to be hopeful in this situation is that brownfield cleanups are being piloted and gaining traction through organizations such as Get Hammer and PA's AMR department. Of course, I know some of you might know the project in Sawyersville, PA, acts as an excellent precedent for me in the scale-up process. Hauling away material, regrading the landscape, and regrading is all similar to what I'd like to propose for Dickson City. So, as a designer, I'm both a logical and abstract thinker. I began designing by diagramming residential and adjacent large void with rules that follow standard architectural theory. The larger images are synthesized, or the best bits of everything put together, all from the smaller diagrams. So my thought on each of these is simply what if. What if I were to split the site in half? What if I were to observe the topography, the previous location of the breaker, or reflect the neighborhood scale into the interior of the void? Same idea for the house. Where is the hearth located? How do people walk through the space? Where is light getting into the house? I ended up with these synthesized diagrams that I pulled forward from my process. So, yeah, this site, the 36-acre void, it literally does look like that on the satellite map, and then the home sits right along the site, and there's a few pictures later, but I'm diagramming similar things, and then these 2 bigger ones is what I'm synthesizing and pulling together. So here's what the site looks like at a human scale. There's a short hiking trail through the landscape while rows of homes enclose the cone pile on rectilinear plots. The greatest detail that I learned on my site visits was how breathtaking the views are from the top of the site, and how I'd like to preserve both the privacy of the properties and be able to appreciate the landscape. So there's the back of the home on the right side, and their view from their front yard is just the cone pile, and there's a lot of homes that are sitting in that exact spot. So here's another diagram series that I've pulled from similarities from the previous series. This is kind of how I run about my design processes in most treatments. So I'm treating the 36-acre and the original 1925 home in a similar visual and performing manner. The 3 main ideas or buzzwords that I saw in either space were thresholds, gathering spaces, and hearth. I'm treating the hearth of a home and the breaker in the mining site as one and the same because they are taking heat and being a centralized piece in the operation. So The way we enter and navigate these spaces, the way we gather together when we're there, and what provides the warmth or power to the space becomes crucial. The site and homes have an amazingly similar anatomy when we think about them abstractly. There's a huge point that helped me weave the two mini projects together. And this is how I integrated this with the previous McAdoo study in my thesis. So before I get to the final intervention, additional research about environmental and sustainable strategies played a role in the proposals for Dickson City. I created a 3D model of how landscape could be regraded, and I looked about how to revitalize the wildlife within the currently very unruly greenery. I opted for layers or levels instead of sweeping hills, and of course we'd be hauling away the culm piles on the southern end. I looked into the scale of a bioswale that would need to be created in order to address the stormwater runoff issues as well. Bioswales or vegetated swales aid in beautification of the site, encouraging native species and plants to survive, and keeping the neighborhood cleaner. So finally, the intervention proposal took shape. I proposed a revitalized trail system in tiered layers reminiscent of mining veins in a switchback orientation. I had done a precedent study in a park in Ontario that I really enjoyed. So the bioswales I also wanted to make sure were not hidden away, but the highlighted kind of features for educational purposes. The nearly 6,000 square foot building in the center of the site acts as a flexible space to host community meetings, teach in its indoor-outdoor classroom, and live the site's history in a mindful manner. So the aesthetic choices in the assembly type and the material include a salt box style roof line to combat fierce winds in the area. Again, the indoor-outdoor timber colonnade, it encourages hikers and visitors to rest while they're there. Because the trail wouldn't be very large, I was able to hike it no problem, even with its unruly nature. And I also again, I'm not forcing people to be faced with the tragic things that happened in these historical contexts, but living history and having to be a subtle understanding through materials and assembly is what I'm going for here. Although the proposal is solely for academic purposes, I was excited to learn that the Lackawanna County Planning and Economic Development Team received $800,000 by the Pennsylvania AML and AMD program to revitalize the site next winter. It reads, approximately 500,000 cubic yards of red ash and foam waste will be removed from the site. It will be regraded, stabilized, seeded, and local roadways will be repaired. I can only hope that projects like these can push these very real revitalizations to the next level. So here's some 3D renders of the interior and the exterior. I can imagine a lot of local organizations putting the space to good use and having this building as a living example of community initiative and careful consideration and adaptive reuse. Showing something that people can get excited about is one of the best parts of the design process. Again, I tried to bring forward the architectural atmosphere that I spoke about in the beginning, a comfortable place that performs in a way that we can adjust as needed. So the same abstract concepts also come forward in the loose redesign of the residential floor plans. The hope here is to take the home from 1925 to 2025 in a way that still maintains family values, functionality of space, and rejects some of the modern stumbling blocks that we've created for ourselves through trends. I opted for smaller nooks or gathering spaces with places that could be more comfortable to provide for small families. More closet space, 2 extra bathrooms, and more kitchen counter space all can happen while highlighting the features such as the fireplace, the front porch, and the sunroom. I aim to propose a space that is not a sectional sofa and TV centered area, keeping it charming and appealing for people who would like to move to the area while keeping it as functional as possible. Now, the homes wouldn't look too different on this current state on the exterior, except for the materials on the lower foundation and the walls. I was really interested to learn that a Florida-based custom-engineered high-performance materials company called XMAT is working to create an experimental house made of recycled coal. The new ceramic X-Brick or concrete X-Matrix blocks are advertised as fire-resistant, non-toxic, lightweight, durable, and eco-friendly alternative to conventional building materials. So with the help of federal and state funding, they've created a way to replace the standard rock sand aggregate with a coal-based aggregate at standardized sizes, as well as custom mortar to match the material. So these X bricks and X blocks are made to resemble standard bricks and CMU block sizes. It can be assumed to treat them similarly to these as existing building products. For example, bricks are not structural, but they're kind of a decorative masonry veneer. CMU is structural as well as fire rated and useful in the wall and foundation construction. There are many aspects of versatility in both materials, leaving the designer to research and understand what should be done for any given project. These newly designed engineering materials can also be polished for a different look that exposes this nice, dark, anthracite, shiny coal kind of quality. So in my proposal, I integrated that by looking at the R values of residential and community-centered wall structures to see if the waste material could be directly recycled from the site back into the building materials. It is definitely a massive improvement over the standard building materials, along with taking steps towards an interesting and sustainable practice. The reuse of excess mining ash into new construction or the restoration of old homes takes necessary steps in sustainable direction that could influence many other sites along the anthracite region in PA, allowing for the narrative of coal mining to live on in a beautiful and useful way rather than a harmful hindrance can rebuild the communities and share the labor heritage. So, to bring this investigation to a conclusion, I'd like to reiterate that these are all concepts driven by my curiosities and research about how to go about revitalization. It's a huge thing to bite and chew. I think it's an exciting and emerging field that urgently needs to be addressed, so I'm happy to have the opportunity to do so. So, just to summarize, I tackled the issue at 3 different scales to try to cover my bases here. The domestic interior in Dickson City, community public space in McAdoo, and the large-scale environmental cleanup, also in Dickson City. Adaptive reuse can be all of these types of projects at all of these scales. It's a fascinating concept to me, but we can push beyond fixing up the interior of old factories and warehouses like we've seen before. We can literally reshape the landscapes for the better, and we can create vibrant neighborhoods with comfortable homes within those landscapes. Each of these intervention proposals are meant to be fully customizable to any community with their available resources and scale. Each would have their own specific features to keep it homey and considerate to its atmosphere and narrative. Storytelling, healing the landscape, reusing artifacts, and reinstalling the value in dozens of towns will set an example for future generations that progress towards an idealized community spirit that life can be a little bit better here. Thank you. Open to questions, please.
Any questions?
I'd first like to say I think it was a very good presentation.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it. And, you know, living in a community, I'm from Plattsville, so living in a community where, you know, I get to see this firsthand, you know, and kind of being a witness to all this stuff going away. You know, it is a neat concept to see you looking to preserve it. Would you consider leaving any of the calm banks as a feature next to like one of these breaker design places, but leaving, you know, because they're kind of a looming thing that people have seen their whole life. You know, it's interesting, sometimes a mine wants to take a bank away and people are like, but that's been behind my house my whole life, I don't want to see it go.
It's been
You're
so
like,
long that it's an
really?
icon, right, yeah.
But
Yeah.
when they're all gone, then it's like, oh geez, there's nothing left, like the Huber breaker, the old St. Nick breaker, like, you know, and now it's like, where are you gonna go to find a breaker?
Yeah, and that's part of the thinking with memory through form. We could recognize something by the shape of a coal bank or the towering nature of a breaker and the way that the vertical kind of cladding looked. So I think it would be up to the community to decide, you know, what value those kind of features have, or, you know, what kind of resources they have to go after revitalization. Because I know a lot of communities are just, I worked a lot in an old colliery, the Gravity Slope Colliery up in Archibald, and they work on such a small scale because they've built houses, like residences all along the site, and they're so butted up next to each other, they're so close that they say, well, now we only have so much room to do our revitalization process, let's look and reach further, like let's revitalize the rails to trails and get a train station here, let's make sure that people are just able to see the site when they're running along the Lackawanna Heritage Trail. So even just small gestures as opening a trail or making the site accessible, or even just closing in a roof and making sure it's insulated and not rotting away, can also be very helpful and impactful to the community. Yeah.
Yes, so I mean, this is good, and Bobby, good on you for asking her to do this. Because, yeah, that, as an engineer, you know, we kind of get focused on important stuff like removing dissolved iron or, you know, manganese from the stream, but it doesn't have that people-to-people connection, but this is. I'm getting educated in how that's very important, getting me out of my just engineering mindset, but, yeah, but cultural heritage and people's history and their connection, it's so important. So I just say I appreciate it. This is an aspect that we need to think more about.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating project and really well thought out. I like the close attention to memory work and the design of all the different things, everything from materials to the way the spaces are laid out. It's brilliant. I was questioning the end of it. You said this is sort of serendipitous opportunity of just as you've designed this as part of your thesis, they now are looking for it. So is this something sort of looking forward? Are you going to be able to propose this in any way? Do you have plans to sort of try to move this into fruition?
I haven't had that opportunity yet. I would love to do some collaboration with people that are actually going after revitalization process for these. This has been a work in progress. It is, I mean, the McAdoo project was actually a full year and a half, and all the Dickson City work happened within the last 2 months of my thesis. So just processing it and chewing on it a little bit, you know, fine tuning it up a little bit has been my focus over the summer. But yeah, I'd love to get a hold of them before they go forward with anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've
Check
told
the deadlines,
we've
right?
told her, like, hey, FCAM will slip in and
Yeah.
move in that direction and to sort of facilitate some of those discussions, because these are ideas and concepts that very place-based in our communities that need to maybe happen more often than just we want to, or what is seen as the warehouses and the distribution centers and data centers, the things that are very big, very large, but that's what's along the highways maybe to be easy access. But in the communities themselves, like what she sought out, at the heart of the communities that still have these banks that could be not just remembered and restored in a way that brings the community back to what may have been, but not also be negative. You know, there's some of that but there's also positive in the resurrection of how these sites are being looked at. And I mean, her mind is brilliant. I was just happy to go see this, and I said, oh, this is something we need to talk more about. So I'm really glad to see that this landscape architecture component of our watershed communities that we all work in that are very place-based as well, but it's land and water, but it's people and homes and, you know, communities as well. So it's a really nice tie. You did a great job.
Yeah, anything you can do to get it to them in time. You look around the area, there's a lot of other revitalization, but I haven't seen any with this kind of attention to memory and the history of the places where new projects are proposed. So I would think it should be a shoo-in from that perspective, but.
Yeah, Stephanie, if you get some extra time, the Shamokin needs some love.
And Colton, and Mount Carmel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, I'm not very clever, but like, did you make the building material? Did you say we could make building material from the ash, or?
Well, the company's based in Florida. They work in bituminous coal, not anthracite coal, so I don't know what the scientific, you know, engineering side of those kinds of things look like, but if that's possible, you know, it's something to get people excited about and say, you know what, this material, you can either haul it away and burn it or recycle it, only, you know, a certain percentage of it, or what can you do with it that takes it and rebuilds itself instead of having this narrative of, oh, we dug into the earth and then we left it. Can we literally rebuild our homes and these places that are appealing to us using these materials?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
You know, I want to echo what others have said about your presentation. It's excellent. And I just want to point out, I mean, if you aren't aware of it, there's a paper written by a professor at Bucknell University. It was called Continuity and Decline in the Anthracite Towns of Pennsylvania by Ben Marsh.
I think I'm somewhat familiar, yeah.
And it has a lot of commonality with your personal sort of, this is why it's important. But he was explaining why are people still living in these communities that are so degraded and run down, and there's a sense of place and belonging that's lacking in any other way. It's a really good paper, so.
I know Ben Marsh, can introduce you to him.
Did you? Yeah, so I was just, this is something I always, like, I live near the anthracite area, I live in it, but I live near it, done a lot of work in it, and I often recommend this paper to people just to understand where, you know, this setting and the communities,
Yeah.
because they're really run down.
Hey, Shamokin's turning corner. It is, right? Yeah, I think Shamokin's first days are behind it. I don't live there, but I work there, but, you know, there's a really cool bar, money's coming in, things are improving. Yeah, it's all up. It, for sure.
There are many communities, you know, as you hear, you know, and many of them have revitalization committees and I feel like some of them don't have a focus. I mean,
Yeah.
you're looking at an abandoned building and say,
Yeah.
okay, we need to do something about this, we need to do something about this. Where do they go? Find someone like you.
I'm an oddball. That's the thing about, I work freelance design now and I do oddball projects, mostly in adaptive reuse because I find them so fascinating and there's not a lot of people that have this interest or this expertise. When you go to school for 6 years for this kind of thing, there's only a certain setting for that. You know? I'm very glad to be here and have this community of people that care about the same things and enjoy my lens and I enjoy your lens. But yeah, it's tough.
Do you have a stack of business cards?
She's not an oddball, she is a shining star, that's what she is. For the
Do you
reason.
do you happen to work with any of the planning commissions in the areas?
Not currently. I've only ever worked with small, like the Archibald Borough, for example. They had a relationship just with Marywood University, and then Marywood put us through as the cohort of interior architecture and said, you know, these are the right people for you. So,
You can take another question if you want, we have a few minutes, but that's it before the break here. I'm sure Steph will talk to you afterwards.
yeah.
Yeah, if I can go back to, yeah, is that okay? I'm curious. Yeah, have you been to McAdoo City? I'm not sure you have.
Yes.
No?
Yeah.
Because, I don't know if it's changed, but I was there for 2 years ago, canvassing for an unnamed political organization. And I was blown away at the downtown, like, not just that the subsidence, I'm assuming subsidence had like, I think it was a bank or, it's not just that there was a major hole in the street, but like, if this happened anywhere else, there'd be like, danger, do not cross.
Yeah.
It is just taken to normal, so I don't know if you have any, I don't really have a question, but just curious, like, I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Lancaster, PA, but my parents, both of their parents are from Hazleton, McAdoo area. All of my lineage comes from that specific spot. So I grew up going up and down between Lancaster, you know, 3-hour drive up to that area, and just, we always go the back way, of course, but just seeing how things never changed. I'm 25 years old when you just, it never ever changes, and you wonder what's happening here. How does life work here? What do people, you know, I saw that McAdoo's sidewalks were repaved a couple of years ago. I'm like, okay, so that services people that walk back and forth, but where are they going? What are they doing? What happened to this building that's right across from the biggest gas station in town? And that's the only landmark they have. So that's where my curiosity started when I went to go to grad school. Just observing and seeing all of it.
Yeah, Monterey City didn't get any better in the last 3 years.
It hasn't, yeah.
But every town has the old factory in the town, and it's like a marble building, but it's degrading.
Yeah.
And it's like hard to bring the community back when their feature building is leaking through the ceiling, and it's like, oh my God. You know, and they're not part of big revitalization, we're gonna put a bar room and you know, restore the factory. So if you ever figure it out, there's a ton of work.
Oh, I
that you
know,
can
yeah.
get through the whole area.
And that's why I want it to be a template to move forward, like, okay, we have this whole sprawl of towns that have the same or similar narrative, what can I do to just provide, here's an idea, or here's a lovely picture of what this could be, just so you can gather that support and then move forward with it.
Well, at the same time, you were presenting, Elizabeth Hughes from the Earth Conservancy is presenting.
On the street restoration side.
Yeah, but it's also, they're doing more than just environmental restoration. So they're also doing development. And I think some of these same concepts would be really of interest if they're not aware of what your work is.
I'll tell you what, we'd like to find money to hire someone like her to be on staff to do this kind of work in our communities. And these are kinds of positions I think that could open up throughout the region and throughout the country in our communities to do this type of work, because it's bringing an entirely different perspective to what we're looking at trying to do in reclaiming the land and restoring the water and, you know, cleaning up our waterways. So this is It's just the people power for these types of efforts that are going on that we love
Well,
to see.
some of the same things, it's like you have to make the community attractive to, you know, I talk about industry, you know, where do people work? But to put an industry in a place like that, you have to have it desirable for people to live there. And, you know, so one benefits the other.
Double-edged sword, it's like where you live and where you go, and you have to have something that's appealing both if someone's new to the area, someone my age, and that's what I was after, Dickson City. Thank you so
Great,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Allison Fensky.
My full signature for the will considered, seeing all my. Thanks.